All right. Welcome to our prophecy update for our final update of the year. Actually, 12/31/24, last day of the year. We want to give a prophecy update. We didn't do as many this year as I wanted to. I committed myself to teach the Word of God more on Wednesdays and Sundays and throughout the week. And I gave updates along the way, but I focused more on preaching and teaching most part of the year. And I focus on bringing the topics that are relevant to prophecy on episodes like Catching Up with Jacob, which you can watch every Friday live. We have it on Devore TV and also on Devore channel as well. And you can catch that every Friday. We post on Community Church of Devore Truth a little bit later on that day. But I really sense the Lord really moving my heart and spirit back to updates. This coming year, as we see the world events taking shape. We pray that we could do more of these updates along the year. And so please keep us in prayer for that. I love to keep the body of Christ aware of the current events and to fulfill the word of the Lord, to be alert, to be watchful, to be seeking, and to know the contemporary events that are going on do point to the return of Jesus Christ. So this is where, as a Bible teacher, as a pastor, as a Christian, we are commanded to be alert. We're commanded to pray and to and be watchful and not asleep, spiritually asleep, regarding the events that are going on. So I pray that you find the scriptures we're going to share today and the information we shared today, encouragement along the way. We're going to need that for this coming year. So as we close the year, we want to remind everyone, I was at church on Sunday and our worship leader, Christian, played the song, Is He Worthy? From Revelation chapter 4 and 5, and eventually, of course, chapter 6 with the breaking of the seals. And it just brought my heart to really worship the Lord and to think He's the only one that can open the seals, break the seals and open the scroll. And that's truly is the wonderful thing as a Christian, to know that only Christ can open the seals, to begin the process in which God will not only bring His kingdom to earth, but judge the nations, judge the world in righteousness, and bring about the return of Jesus, and ultimately the setting up of God's kingdom, and Jesus is King, and the believers to rule and reign together with Him. But all these events, no matter how difficult they seem to happen, and they seem to be happening quite a bit throughout the world, and how difficult things may become in different parts of the world, some not so much, some a little bit more, we have to keep in mind that the end is not yet. Matthew 24, Jesus told us these birth pangs were going to be here, and we're going to see them in the world, in the church, and in Israel as we get closer to that midpoint of the 70th week of Daniel, which is the abomination of desolation. But Jesus told us that do not fear, the end is not yet. And we ought to keep going despite the persecution of the body of Christ, the trials and tribulations and false teachers and prophets that will arise and deceive many. The true church, the remnant church, is to go on and preach the gospel of the kingdom throughout the nations. And then the end will come. And so there's much work to be done. Despite the events that we see looming, we have not to get caught up in a situation where, like the Thessalonians in 2 Thessalonians, they stopped doing all the ministry and all the work because they thought Jesus was coming very soon. In fact, the more we see Jesus is coming soon, the more we ought to be at work. So I'd like to start with the fact that there's 20 days until the inauguration of Donald Trump here in the United States. And what do we have here? Well, a current bird flu strain that some claim it's gain of function out of a research lab in the east of the United States. But there's a media frenzy and quite a bit of fear that's going on. And a chorus of researchers right now and health experts are warning that the U.S. government's failure to contain the bird flu outbreak among cattle will soon lead to even a worse than 2020, than what happened with the virus in 2020. So things like Health News, KFF Health News, which printed a report that cited all kinds of numerous experts and government officials that basically were castigating government officials and government leaders and health agencies because they didn't provide protection for what happened in 2020. So here we go again. There is a flu that's coming across. I live in California, so California is called a state of emergency, and there's nearly 70 government officials and farmers and farm workers and research and experts in virology and pandemics and veterinary, because there's cattle, there's chickens and birds that are getting it. Now humans are getting it. And so there is a slow drip that's turning into a big push to bring, in my opinion, lots of fear. And this push is moving forward. Places like in my home state of California, and they're trying to start mass testing here to justify the measures that are coming. So just like 2020, we see the testing, the ramping up of not only fear, uncertainty, doubt, to justify testing. We've heard this before. Now, the authorization for vaccination is coming, and we had Dr. Leanne Wen, who says this flu, we should have learned lessons from last flu in 2020, and that we need to test. So social media actually erupted this weekend because Leanne Wen went on Face the Nations, which is a widely known. I'm not saying widely watched. I don't think people watch that as much anymore because of some of the lies that have come out of that. But she is advocating on Face the Nations, which is still a prominent show, not much watched, but very known, that she's advocating that the current administration needs to expedite a vaccine for this.
What should be happening in the Biden administration right now that isn't going on?
Yeah, there are two main things that they should be doing in the days that they have left. The first is to get testing out there. We should be having rapid tests, home tests available to all farm workers, to their families, for the clinicians taking care of them, so that we aren't waiting for public labs and CDC labs to tell us what's bird flu or not. And the second very important thing is, this is not like the beginning of COVID where we were dealing with a new virus, we didn't have a vaccine. There actually is a vaccine developed already against H5N1. The Biden administration has contracted with manufacturers to make almost 5 million doses of the vaccine. However, they have not asked the FDA to authorize the vaccine. There's research done on it. They could get this authorized now and also get the vaccine out and to farm workers and to vulnerable people. I think that's the right approach because we don't know what the Trump administration is going to be doing around bird flu. If they have people coming in with anti-vaccine stances, could they hold up vaccine authorization? If they don't want to know how much bird flu is out there, could they withhold testing? I mean, that's a possibility. And I think the Biden administration in the remaining days should get testing and vaccines widely available so that at least it empowers state and local health officials and clinicians.
So in light of this attention, she's bringing about the fact that the current administration needs to really get the testing and really get a vaccination done. And she's quoted all these different tests, and she's quoting all the CDC and that there's 65 cases and hospitalization is starting to happen. So Leanne Wen doesn't have a profile to be an honest person, by the way. I don't really trust her. And she immigrated from China, became a doctor and a public health advocate. She has a long history of working with Planned Parenthood, writing for the Washington Post, sitting on the board of Big Pharma. So you can see the conflict of interest there of somebody who's really trying to promote a new vaccination. And meanwhile, she's every bit of an advocate for those things. And she was a very big advocate of what happened in 2020, only to come back after she continued to promote fear, only to come back 2 years later, so a couple of years ago, to say that she was wrong. Yes, you got a lot of things wrong. Like a lot of things were not true regarding, the lockdowns and all that stuff that happened. And so she had to take some of her words back. So in reality, she's not really a person that has a lot of trust, a track record of trust. And they also brought out another person, Deborah Birx, the lady with the Queen of Scarves, as we call her here in America. And it responds that she says we need getting ready for another 2020, another, in her words, another potential one. And so they're bringing out the same people that brought the fear and anxiety and doubts and all that. they are bringing him back on the news. So there's a great hysteria going on right now with PCR testing and all these things coming. So she's back to her old tricks, and in my opinion. And so right now it is something that is being promoted in the news, being promoted among government officials, especially here in California. And I wouldn't be surprised if it began to happen in other places within the United States. Now, there's also the effect that's having with the WHO, the World Health Organization, as well as in the UK with the promotion of the concern of bird flu. When I was in the UK this past November, I was also reminded that during that time, even heading to York, even heading to places like York after we went to Scotland, there was that concern, and they were promoting this idea that there was bird flu coming up in that area. So you could see that it slowly began to leak out, and it began to have this big push, like a slow drip, into getting people to really get concerned for this coming bird flu. And in my opinion, this is something that it's not unique. We've been through it before, and lo and behold, it's happening right before a Trump inauguration. And so it's really hard to convince people sometimes that it's not something that it's that people should pay attention to it, of course, but I don't think it's something that people need to be that concerned at this point, and because there's more to it than what they're telling us. A couple of weeks ago, Peter Hotez, which is one of the biggest pharma and pro-vaccines promoters on the planet, in my opinion, announced that there's all kinds of diseases that are coming out. And lo and behold, he says they'll be hitting right around January 20th, because it is, of course, because it's completely natural, right? That it comes up when a new president takes over. That's my opinion of it. But at the same time, we heard from our Governor Gavin Newsom talked about that it's an emergency, that we need to have this because there's all these cases, which they haven't really told us how many true cases. They just kind of name that there are cases and there's a certain number of them, but they don't tell us where they are and what they've done with them. So a lot of headlines. And so we have to keep in mind that just like last time, there was a lot of hysteria and a lot of things were said without many proofs. And people believed it because that's the nature of it. The nature is to trust what people say and to trust our government officials. But I'm hoping that the people will be able to think through this, because there is the flu shots that are being rolling out, because every year they roll it out, and all the medical officials need testing to get this emergency going. The more you testing, we see the PCR test, what happened last time. There's all these tests and all these people that were asymptomatic, they didn't have the cases. So it is happening again. And of course, they're rolling out Moderna, and they're rolling out all these other companies are bringing out just in time a bird flu vaccine. So be on the watch for that, especially this coming year. I believe there is an attempt to launch a new lockdown using the H5N1 bird flu. And there is doctors like Dr. Leonard Wen and Birx and Fauci. And of course, behind the scenes, always looming behind the scenes, there are people who want to create this hysteria. So, by the way, it's not just within the medical industry. There's also within the government industry, people like Chuck Schumer, who wants to stack the courts with federal judges, local federal judges, to really undermine the new presidency. And I think there's I called it Operation Block Trump, and which is basically a deep state coup to try to get him away from having any possibility of being the president in any sort of way, because they would always undermine. These new federal judges will be confirmed under Biden. It's a total of 235 that he's actually confirmed. So I believe there's something going on with not only Jamie Raskins, who seems to be a ringleader, but they're going to try to ramp up this idea of not only lockdowns, not only diseases, not only a civil war that they're going to try to pin on the new administration, that he's going to kill all these people, take away rights. And that was the idea that happened right away after he he won the election, that they were saying that Trump was going to take away everybody's rights and all that stuff. And there are people who seemingly believe this, and they went online and make videos about that. And there's quite a bit of people that actually believe that we're in some kind of regime that is going to take everybody's rights. Now, even the Democratic Party, it is wanting to introduce a bill by Blumenthal to take away the power of the executive branch domestically, so the president can only have power outside internationally, which is, of course, what they're trying to do with the new oncoming president. And they keep bringing this 14th Amendment, Section 3. You've seen this probably pictures and memes of 3-14 or 3/14, which is basically an old amendment. It was a Civil War amendment in which war generals and even the president of the Confederacy, Southern states, was Jefferson Davis, that they could not hold government offices after the Civil War, and that they could not take offices in the government, and it was called the insurrection. It was called, they're trying to, the Insurrection Act, they're trying to pin some kind of insurrection on Trump, which he's never been found to be in an insurrection. They have accused him of it, but nothing's ever been found. In fact, it's gotten so crazy within the United States that they even want western coastal states, that would be California, my home state, Oregon, and Washington, to actually secede from the union and have their separate inauguration for Joe Biden if he was to win the election. At one point, they thought he was going to win. So I think the insurrection and the coup, it's really on the other side. But even newspapers like The Hill here in the United States, in light of what the Democrats are doing, they're also thinking about what happened with Jimmy Carter. He passed away on Sunday, and they're going to have funeral future plans for National Day of Mourning for Jimmy Carter. And, they say Jimmy Carter was an excellent president and things like that. And I'm not going to get too much into it, but Jimmy Carter made a lot of mistakes. They said he was a nice guy. I obviously never met him, but they said he was a nice guy. But one thing for sure, many of his policies led to destructive things, not only with the Panama Canal, not only what happened in my home country, Nicaragua, what happened with Iran, what happened with the economy, international and domestically. There was a big mess, and of course he was defeated by Ronald Reagan in 1980 election, and he was, of course, defeated soundly in the election, and because the people just had enough of his, he's dead at 100 years old. He died on Sunday, and he didn't leave a great legacy. One of the things that's interesting as a Christian, he was actually the first president that I've known that actually came out and said he was a born-again Christian. He coined and made born-again Christian a household name. He was from the South, and he was from Georgia, and but he did not display many of Christians' characters and behavior. He definitely was anti-Semitic, very anti-Israel in his policies, and ultimately, in the end, as he was getting older, he was very much involved in boycotting Israel and speaking against Israel and the Jewish people. Now, with that said, many critics within the Democratic Party have talked about the U.S. expansion under Trump. And one of the things they talked about is Trump wants to take Canada, Trump wants to take Greenland, Trump wants to take the Panama Canal. And it's interesting, and I'm not going to go into much on the Canada. I think it's a troll, I think it's a joke, but Canada is, he talks about Prime Minister of Canada, Justin Trudeau, being a governor of the 51st state. And there are some Canadians, I think there is quite a number of Canadians actually, who would love to see what Trump has to say, because he says, I'll cut your taxes, you'll have gun rights, you'll have freedom of speech and all that. So the Canadians are interested, at least some of them are interested. Is it going to happen? Probably not the way we see it now. Eventually down the road, I do see something interesting. There's always been this talk of a North America Union. And I even think back in the early 2000s, or even just late 90s, as a young Christian, I would hear about this ultimate plan that they would love to have what Europe had, which was basically a European Union, a North American Union. Even with NAFTA, that was a total failure by Bill Clinton, there was this idea that they could make these blocks of economic power blocks within the United States, Canada, and Mexico. And so there was this plan, and it never really brought to fruition, but they even floated the idea of an Amera, which would be a currency that would basically be used in Canada, United States, and Mexico. Now, regarding the Panama Canal, people talked about this, and it's interesting. There is a Chinese CCP occupation for years there along the Panama Canal. They've been influenced with the Silk Road. Back in the Carter days, there was Jimmy Carter turned over the canal with the treaty with Panama to turn the canal over back to Panama, and they did. But now the Chinese, the CCP, has come in there, and there's this. There's, of course, the Silk Initiative, the Silk Road Initiative. And so, and by the way, Panama does charge a lot of money to go through that canal. And so there has been a push by the United States to deal with this because of the exorbitant amount of money that U.S. ships are trying to do. So I think Trump is really trying to bring some kind of regain control of the trading there, because it's so much money that's coming in. Obviously, the president of Panama says, no, it belongs to Panama. And I do think eventually things are just going to be negotiated into what he sees, the sum of money that is being spent by U.S. trading and companies that is just so exorbitant that they're trying to figure out a way to bring a deal that will solidify a better trading. Now, Greenland is interesting, and I think Greenland should be talked about more in general, and we won't have time today to deal with it, but Greenland strategically and militarily, it's something that the United States has tried to do before. Some people say, well, I never heard of this before. Actually, the first serious proposal for the U.S. to buy Greenland was back in 1910, then in 1945, at the close of the Second World War. President Truman, along with Senator Owen Brewster, considered buying the world's largest island, and they called it a military necessity. Now, it's quite interesting. This is back in the Truman days. And the next year, the U.S. offered, I think they offered $100 million in gold bullions, an equivalent to about $1 billion today, if my math is right. And so the U.S. government considered offering the bay, Prudhoe Bay, in Alaska to Denmark in exchange for Greenland, and which would have allowed Denmark to benefit. Actually, if you think about it now, 20 years later, they found the largest discovery of oil, petroleum in American history in that bay, or near that bay. So although the offer amounted to nothing, serious discussions were made to purchase Greenland. And this has continued well into the 50s. So obviously we didn't know anything about this until I think the negotiation details came out. They were classified and then declassified in the 70s. So the military base is there. We have a military base there, and I think the what's going on in the Arctic, and this is something that we should discuss throughout the year, and maybe another update, that in the Arctic there's quite a bit of going on between Russia, China, there's NATO, there is obviously Canada, there's Denmark, and the United States, and people are wondering, well, who controls that area? Well, there's quite a bit of military operations there, and so it is a military strategic there for the United States, just simply speaking from the United States perspective, to basically watch over that area, because China and because Russia, and now that I think about it, putting it together with Canada, it would create a buffer zone that Canada would actually benefit, because they would be able to hold off any sort of attacks that could come from China or from Russia. In this day and age, it is very possible. So the missile defense system. By the way, Greenland has enormous mineral wealth, which really Denmark hasn't really done much with it. And so there's also the Arctic shipping routes, as all the melting ice in that area makes it possible for the Arctic routes year round. So it's a serious economic for Canada, for the United States, for the Western world. And it has military implications, no doubt, as you see China and Russia moving very close to a world war. I don't think I have to convince you of that. And so they can easily gain control of that area. So if they don't do that, this is Trump administration's plan, Russia and China can easily gain control of these new routes. And they do want to, by the way. They do want to. So large deposits of rare earth minerals. And that would allow the U.S. to, in my opinion, to break the monopoly that the CCP has over the U.S. and over the whole world in terms of rare earth minerals. So it is interesting, and I'm saying it's going to happen today, tomorrow. But what I do think is going to happen is it's going at least going to allow Denmark to make some of these trade agreements to try to stop and try to curtail Chinese control on earth minerals, rare earth minerals, as well as the shipping reliance, as well as military protection for Canada, Denmark, and because there are weaknesses that decades we've seen it. This is not a new thing, but the short-sightedness of many of the administrations prior to Trump has mismanaged, and a lot of times they bungle this and created a lot of problems in that area. Now, I think Trump did bring it up in 2016 when he was president, 2017, and but nothing really happened. So many people wanted to talk about that. So I hope that helps you along the way. There's much to see, but I do see the fact that why this is happening along the way now. Now, this is, of course, leading up to what's going on in the wars and rumors of wars. The U.S. Treasury says Chinese hackers stole documents in major incident. And this is a big, big deal back on December 8th. And the spokesperson for the Treasury Department, that they said that there was a third party that was involved in it because they do third party, I think it's cybersecurity providers, Beyond Trust. Yeah, I think it's Beyond Trust. And were able to access unclassified documents. So they compromised a third-party security service provider. So the hackers went into Beyond Trust, which is the security provider for the Department of Treasury, U.S. Treasury. And so this is a big problem, that cybersecurity continues to be a problem. And this is, of course, along with what's going on in Finland and Estonia with the cutting of the cables and the tanker that's being investigated because they ripped these cables underneath underwater cables. And so Finland they're trying to board these oil tankers. They're suspecting because they cause all kinds of internet issues. So along the way, and we talked about this on Catching Up, along the way, in war, there's the first thing that happens is you have to cut off the communication of your enemy. And so I've seen this more than a few times already with these underwater cables being cut, Germany, Sweden, Estonia, Finland. And so there's a disrupt and deter mentality. And so the Baltic Sea and Estonia has become frequent area for some of these damages. So we have to keep an eye on that because Russia, its foreign minister actually talked about it just recently on Monday. So yesterday, he rejects any sort of Trump peace plan for Ukraine that allegedly was leaked. And what is interesting about it is that as Russia begins to talk about peace, there was this leak that came out that one of the parts of Trump's peace plan for Ukraine and Russia was to give Ukraine access to NATO eventually. I think it's in 20 years. To that, Russia said absolutely not. And so this interview that was done by Trump with Time Magazine, plus some documents that were quote unquote leaked, has made Lavrov, the foreign minister of Russia, to say we don't want this, and so they're ready for peace. And it's sort of, Putin wants peace. He keeps talking about he's open to peace talks with Ukraine on the single condition that they hold elections. And this is quite interesting. Although people will speak evil of Putin, on this regard, he's right. Did you know that Zelensky has been more or as much of a dictator as Putin has, because he has suspended elections for the last few years. He says that there would be no elections, so he's actually withholding elections. Most people that speak well of Zelensky will never talk about this. They talk about freedom and we're fighting for freedom, we're fighting for democracy. Now Zelensky, he has not held elections. He refuses to hold elections. And yes, some of the supporters will say, well, in a time of war, this is what happens. They've had elections at time of war. We had elections in time of war. There's always been elections in time of war, unless, of course, the president of the prime minister, who's of the country, doesn't want to, so they can hold power. So this is, I think, what Zelensky has been doing, and this is true. What Putin says. No, I'm not a Putin supporter of any sort. But when it's true, it's true. And so the same thing Putin has been accused of and done is the same thing Zelensky is doing. So this sentiment of Putin to say we're open for peace, he wants Trump to broker the peace deal, he wants to have elections in Ukraine, which rightly so, right? And Lavrov also discussed political climate changes in Israel, Iran, Syria, Taiwan, China, and Georgia, which I think are very interesting. And if you could see what Russia is interested in, they're interested in this geopolitical climate. And one of the ones they mentioned is Israel, which is interesting. And even they brought up Syria too, the inability of Assad to address the social problems. And they're concerned that these destructive actions will play a major role in the Middle East. So Russia still has an eye on the Middle East, even though they want this peace talk. And whether or not you see Lavrov as a good cop and Putin as a bad cop, whether there's a sort of bad cop, good cop kind of mentality there, I don't know. But definitely they're open for peace. And my thing has been said, I'm catching up, and in other videos that we made is, they're open for peace, but no one wants to have peace. NATO doesn't want to have peace. I think the only person that's been talking about peace is Trump, and I do pray that they do have peace. It's been more than almost 1 million people, Ukrainian and Russians, that have died. And this is absolutely terrible. By the way, the Lavrov, they aired a interview with the foreign minister of Russia, Lavrov, on Christmas Day. They play this, I think it was on 60 Minutes. Not a lot of people watched it, but I think people ought to watch it. It's very interesting what he said in regards to peace, Ukraine, and of course, Zelensky keeps pandering for money, more billions of dollars, which the Biden administration has been more than willing to give them. And but Zelensky has abandoned this idea of victory, and he does have talked about peace with securities guarantees, which one of those guarantees Russia wants is an election. I don't think he wants an election. Zelensky doesn't want an election because he may lose, but we'll see. We'll see how this goes. But there is quite a number of people that want this, of course, to have some peace in our world and the threat of nuclear war. I was going to talk about quantum computer, but I think I'll leave it for the next time. But I did want to talk about Israel and what's going on there. Last week, the Houthis launched another attack on Tel Aviv and hit the Ben Gurion airport, near the Ben Gurion airport, and it was intercepted, and there wasn't much damage. There were some open areas where it landed. But in Yemen, the Israelis attacked Sana'a, the capital, and 6 people were killed and wounded, and dozens, including even UN workers, which the Israeli claims that they did not know that the UN workers were there. Even the head of the World Health Organization was there. So it's quite interesting what's going on, because the Houthis, which is another tentacle of Iran, seems to be the one most active against Israel. Not the only one, but the most active. Hezbollah, Hamas, and the Houthis, they continue to attack Israel despite the attacks on Yemen in retaliation. By the way, the U.S. is helping Israel shoot down these rockets that are coming from Yemen. They're actually using the THAAD missile system, THAAD missile launchers, THAAD. And it's interesting, I did not know that they were using it. The U.S. was using, because they were built back at the authorization during the Reagan era. But they're never being used to shoot down any missiles in combat. So this is actually the first time that they actually used them in combat. So the missile threat continues to loom over Israel. Hezbollah has been struck 25 times the last 30 days. Hamas is very much in desperate need to just have a peace deal and be completely obliterated, because they're not fighting much. However, there is something interesting that in yesterday, sirens went off in Jerusalem, and the attacks came not from the Houthis, actually came from Gaza, which is from Hamas. And those missiles were coming out of Gaza. They were shut down. On Sunday, 5 other missiles were shot from Gaza, and they landed in the southern communities. I think it was near Sderot. And but they came out of, I believe the area is Beit Hanun area in the northern border of Gaza. So these are the northern border of Gaza. Israel has been there. They cleared out the area of any Hamas terrorists, but there's still rockets being launched from there. So they were buried, and a lot of these times these rocket launchers are buried, and then Israel clears the area, and then the terrorists come back and they start using them again. So it is something that it continues to be a thorn on the side of Israel, that these terrorists continue to to exist and use rocket launchers. So it's not just this idea that it's only the Israelis attacking, the poor people in Gaza. There's terrorists still attacking Jewish people, Jewish communities. By the way, I think this is the seventh day of Hanukkah now. So, seventh. It will be tonight, the seventh day of Hanukkah. But the first day of Hanukkah, National Security Minister of Israel, Itamar Ben-Gvir, scandalous action. What was the scandal? He went to pray to the Temple Mount. And this is quite interesting. Can you believe this? Hanukkah celebration of the dedication of the temple. That's what Hanukkah is for. It's the dedication of the temple, the celebration of the Maccabees defeating the Syrians, and defeating the Greeks. And they were able to defeat them. And after the temple was desecrated, the abomination of desolation that Daniel spoke about, they rededicated the temple. It's called the Feast of Lights, the Feast of Dedication. John chapter 10, Jesus celebrated it. And this is what Ben-Gvir was talking about, that he went over to pray because he was celebrating the dedication of the temple against foreign invaders. What an outrage, right, to the world. The world was outraged. But he said he went to pray for the safety of the soldiers, the return of the hostages, which have been there now for more than a year, even American hostages, in a complete victory with God's help. He's a very religious man, Jewish religious man. He's not a Christian. He's not a Jewish believer in Messiah of Yeshua. But the state of the world is that this guy is nuts. Now, more Jews, aside the political thing, put that aside, more Jews are coming to the temple. There's no doubt. I talked about it at the conference in England, at the Memorial Conference in England, that more Jews are coming to the temple, not only in Hanukkah, but it happened in Yom Kippur. They had a high priest, a descendant of the high priest, prayed, go up there with the full garb and pray the Aaronic benediction. Ben-Gvir has been very vocal about this, about religious rights and religious freedom. And you know what? Netanyahu said, well, the status has not changed. It's still under Jordanian rule. And it's still under the Waqf, which controls the area of the temple. They have Jordanian police, and it's a Waqf police, and they basically regulate who can go up there and pray, who can't pray. But more and more Jews, even influencers, YouTube influencers and Jewish influencers, are going up there to pray for the temple because they think they want religious freedom, they want freedom of speech, and that's what they believe freedom of speech and freedom of religion is. So there's still some resistance by the government, but Jews, whether we're religious, political, secular, believe it or not, are wanting freedom of speech and freedom of religion. That includes praying in the Temple Mount. And I find that unbelievably fascinating to think that we're living in that age, that time, where not only red heifers are being talked about for the temple to be rebuilt, not only Aaronic priests are going up there to pray and the Aaronic blessing prayed up in the Temple Mount, influencers, secular Jews are wanting this freedom of religion, and I believe Israel is on the cusp of a major religious revival. I'm going to say a messianic Jesus revival. I'm talking about a religious revival where many people will turn to religion, and I believe that is going to set up the time where they believe, and I was actually reading an article of an archaeologist and people that actually work around the area of the city of David that do believe the Ark of the Covenant is in Jerusalem. And they've been very vocal about it, because some people said it was in Egypt, Saudi Arabia, and they believe it's in Jerusalem. And what's interesting about it is that they're getting ready, and you see the religious fervor. I think when Jesus said, pray that your trip when the abomination of desolation is set up, it may not be on the Sabbath. There's an interesting indication that Jerusalem and that area will become very religious, even going back under the law, the Mosaic law, which they don't practice Mosaic law. It's all Talmudic Judaism and Rabbinic Judaism and Kabbalistic Judaism. But it'll be some kind of form of institution that will go back to that. Because even when the temple is set up, and I do believe the temple will be set up at some point, it will have to be at some kind of tribulational temple for the abomination of desolation to take place, that it will be because of the religious fervor. By the way, the violence in Syria continues. If you look at a little bit of the north of Israel, and the stakes are getting higher. The HTS, which is the group that al-Jilani, the current leader of the Syrian army, or the Syrian terrorists, basically, the Assad regime and the loyalists are fighting with them up in the northwest. And by the way, they're uncovering weapons and arresting former Assad officials. So that war continues to be on. There may be some strongholds of loyalists that are still holding on, but there's been some violence against local communities, Alawite communities, which is basically a small branch of Shia Islam. Many refuse to disarm because they don't trust the HTS, the terrorists that are in there. I wouldn't trust them either. There's been some absolutely attacks against Christian communities, Druze community, Jewish communities. That's a very small Jewish community there, almost non-existent now. But the HTS is also moving closer to the Russian air bases, adding another layer of complexity as Russia is trying to broker a peace deal. So northern Syria is also a big problem because of the Kurdish force, the SDF, that are fighting against the Turkish-backed force near Aleppo. And this is another problem because Turkey is watching this very closely and they want to eliminate the SDF, which pulls, again, the Trump administration into a big problem. The previous administration, what you say, the Biden administration, the current one, I should say, they were counting on the SDF to counterattack against ISIS. So with the new Trump administration, we don't know what is going to happen to that area, but it is a very difficult area to govern at this point. We don't know all the ways to who's in charge besides the HTS, but there's pockets of resistance. There's the SDF, there's Turkey, there's the U.S. Military. So it's a very dangerous time in Syria, and I believe Damascus 17 is coming very soon. We did a study called The Fall of Damascus that is on our Devore Truth YouTube. You can watch that, A Judgment of the Nations of Isaiah 13 to 17. So I think the video is called The Fall of Damascus and Christ's Redemption. And it just basically deals with Isaiah 17, but the judgment of the nations as well as we get closer to this time. But Christ has a redemption plan, not only for the Jewish people, praise the Lord, but also for the other sons of Abraham, the Arabs, who have been so cursed by the curse of Islam. And so we need to pray for both the grandchildren of Abraham, the children of Abraham through Jacob, and the children of Abraham through Esau, or in this case, the children of Abraham through Isaac, and the children of Abraham through Ishmael, which have been completely undone by Islam, and then the Jews have been completely overcome by Talmudic Judaism. They both need Yeshua. They both need Jesus. Salvation it's from the Jews, Jesus said. And that salvation needs to preach to the whole world, especially to the descendants of Abraham. Now, final thing. We received some questions about the bitter feud within the Republicans and conservatives regarding and Elon Musk. And this is regarding the H-1B visas, which basically it's a visa that allows American companies to temporarily hire specialized workers from other countries. It's one of the largest programs in the United States. In fact, it's the largest program in the United States for companies to bring foreign workers, specialized tech workers into the United States. So Elon Musk, who's a billionaire technocrat, he's turned Trump advisor, supports this H-1B visa, as well as Vivek Ramaswamy, another Trump supporter, millionaire, who made his money in tech, and there's kind of questions about the pharmaceuticals and the pump and dump that he did with the Alzheimer's drug, and we won't talk about that right now. But last Sunday, Trump announced that there was his name is Sriram Krishnan, which is Senior Policy Advisor for Artificial Intelligence. Now, the pick was intended by Trump to assure that the U.S. will continue to have dominance in the area of AI in other nations. That is true. That's what he wanted. Now, Sriram Krishnan is from India. Strong's opinion about immigration, bringing workers from other countries. He wants to remove any cap, any limit to the H-1B1 visas. And so this will allow companies to bring more foreign workers, especially in the high-tech industry in Silicon Valley, depends on these foreign workers. Now, Trump supporters like Jewish journalist Laura Loomer, who basically said that Sriram Krishnan was a leftist, and that he'll be taking jobs from Americans. Now, I don't think that was wrong. I think Sinan has those tendencies, and Krishnan has those tendencies, and certainly wants to bring not just less foreign workers, but more foreign workers. So again, Elon and Vivek summed up the discussion, and this is what got everybody fired up, saying that American workers are basically lazy, distracted, untrainable, and basically dumb. And this fired everybody up. And so even after the election of Trump, which basically he ran an America First He ran an America First campaign to build workers, to build jobs, to hire workers, to stop sending jobs to other countries, to keep the jobs here. And of course, the immigration policies, that they need to be a lot more stricter in terms of scrutiny on existing programs. So the logistics of all this is unprecedented, and a lot of people supported Trump because they do want to shut down, to at least to halt the migrant activity and at least a moratorium on work visas. Now, for how long, that needs to be discussed and all that. We don't know the details, but many people that supported Trump was because of this, because the abuses by the Biden administrations on the H-1B visa, the H-1B visa, which basically he tries to sneak in, the Biden administration is trying to sneak in millions of third world migrants into the country and label them legal, because those programs are very, it creates a path basically to citizenship. So, Elon Musk and Ramaswamy called for more foreign engineers to allow the U.S. to keep up, right? Which has brought a lot of conservatives, a lot of people that supported Trump to say that this is a traitor. He is calling for the opposite of what Trump ran as his election campaign was, to make America first. And so Elon says that their semiconductor industry needs a lot more workers, and they need, demand for AI and all that stuff. And what's interesting about this is that I think it's a narrative that needs to be dispelled. I don't think there's a lack of engineers or AI specialists in America. In fact, expanding the educational system and streamlining high-skilled workers in the United States, it's something very important. I mean, yes, investing in talent for the future, absolutely. The U.S. has always brought talent from other countries. That's never been the problem. The problem is now they're bypassing Americans. They're bypassing American engineers. They're bypassing those who are here, educated and trained, and part of the culture, part of the United States citizens, who are being passed over and being fired. They have to train their actual replacements because they're brought over because obviously it's an economic thing. Silicon Valley and engineers, they want to be paid less. They want to pay less to these workers coming in than what Americans would get paid. By the way, H-1B1 and depending on the H-1B visas and depending on it depends on your job. So you have to do everything that the company tells you in order to keep that visa. So there's a huge incentive for people that work with H-1B to do all that it takes for the job. So whether it's working, crazy amount of hours without overtime pay, they'll do it. They'll do it because they know that is dependent. Their stay in the United States is dependent on that. So they pay them less. They can work them more, which if you can calculate that, it just continues to artificially suppress wages in the United States. So, by the way, just an indication, Arizona State here in the United States is the largest engineering college in the United States, 27 undergraduate programs and 50 graduate programs. They have like 31,000 students. And in that college alone, right? And out of the 74,000 in that university, this is one of the most esteemed engineer programs in the United States, and just over 15% of those students at Arizona State are on foreign student visas. That means that there's lots of Americans, not only in that engineer program, not only there, but in Stanford, Cornell, Georgia Tech, MIT, UC Berkeley, Purdue, University of New Mexico. And so there's lots of engineers who, by the way, don't drop out, who continue, but they don't get hired because they're passed over. And so there are like 10,000 engineering students from the United States that go into alternate fields because they're just not hired, passed over, or fired. And this is supplemented by the way, those studying in astrophysics and applied physics. So there's graduates that I know, friends of mine that have been engineers that cannot get a job in Silicon Valley because they're always passed over. And there's quite a bit of story, and you can watch some of these videos that people have made. And now, in the long term, the national educational system needs to be changed in America because it's not producing enough engineers, in my opinion, to supply the need. There are plenty of engineers, but in that field, it's going to keep growing. And I think even though we have a lot of engineers coming in from the United States, I think there needs to be expanded because, yes, that is true. A lot of young kids don't want to go into that field. There should be a lot more engineers. There should be a lot more AI tech workers in the United States, but that will actually cut immigration down. But at the same time, you can do both. You can train Americans to do better, and you can bring actually bright people from other countries that want to be Americans. And I think the elephant in the room is being missed, because I don't want to discuss this as a political thing. It's just more of an obvious thing. But I think the elephant in the room is being missed. I think the long-term play is not necessarily immigration. Now, I do support that. I do support the immigration that is needed, legal immigration. My family came that way to the United States. I support using American talent in training and education, but that needs to be a priority in the marketplace. As a Christian, I think we need to value education to the point where we can influence the world through our Christian understanding, our Christian worldview. Christians have always been involved in academia, science, literature, because we believe God is the God of truth, and Jesus is the truth, and the Spirit is the Spirit of truth. And a number of scientists in history have been Christians. They have a Christian worldview that helped them understand science because of the belief in God. They were not atheists. Not all of them were atheists. A lot of them at least believed in God. Some of them were Christians, of course. Because our society has abandoned the truth, we have a decline in our school systems and the pursuit of knowledge that comes from God. So remember what Paul said regarding Christians, to stand firm, right, with the armor of God. And the first weapon, or the first part of that armor, is truth. Stand firm, gird at your waist with truth. So we need truth, and Christians know that they need to have truth. And so this is why, as society has become less Christian, the educational system has become less and less part of our society. Education has become disregarded. And there's absolutely a big gap in our society. And our society has abandoned truth. And we have a decline in schools of truth is because we don't want the knowledge of God, because God is the God of truth. And so there's books that you can read, by the way. This is from Ephesians 6. Stand therefore having your loins girded about with truth, right? We have a culture. We don't have a culture committed to the pursuit of truth. Now, there's some good books that I've read, and I think every Christian should read them to understand what's going on in the decline of our society, is because there's a deliberate down of America, the deliberate dumbing down of America, which was a book. It's called The Deliberate Dumbing Down of America. There's also Brave New Schools by Barry Kijos. He was a good researcher in discernment ministries. The other one is Another Closing of the American Mind by Alan Bloom. And the other one is 7 Men Who Rule the World from the Grave. It speaks of Darwin and Karl Marx and Sigmund Freud and John Maynard Keynes and George Wellhausen, Soren Kierkegaard, and John Dewey, which is the father of modern education in America, which is our federal Department of Education, which was founded in 1979. Jimmy Carter signed that in. It's based on the premise of John Dewey, who was a humanist, atheist, godless, amoral, and that was his. This is what he wanted the educational system to become. But I think so besides that, that's the educational system that needs to overhaul, because we don't have a society that believes in truth anymore. But I think the elephant in the room is this. I think that big play is artificial intelligence and robotics. It's not just about replacing workers with migrants. It's about replacing workers, period. This is a long-term play to not only replace American workers, but eventually replace the migrant workers. Vivek and Elon are absolutely wrong when it comes to H-1B visas, but they are just parroting the cultural lies that we don't have enough workers. We have enough workers. It's just a matter of replacing those workers. That's really what they're in for. And so here, remember that Elon Musk is a transhumanist. He's a technocrat. Don't ever lose sight of that. He may be more willing to integrate humanity into the system more than the World Economic Forum or Klaus Schwab or Harari in the World Economic Forum or other guys in Europe. But he's a transhumanist at the end of the day. And transhumanist, to say the least, he believes in cyborgs. He believes he has the Neuralink that wants to put a chip and integrate with the machine. And that's the end game. Integrating humanity and machine will ultimately, I believe, will give way to the Antichrist kingdom in Revelation 13. Now, we're saying we're there? No, we're not there. But at the same time, it's heading that way. The goal of AI and transhumanism, don't forget, is to reach the point where you can't tell the difference between humanity and machine. It's called singularity. And the goal of that is immortality. So I think there's much more than just a H-1B political conversation and discussion. I think that's a problem. The educational part is a problem. We don't really believe in truth anymore. We need, as Christians, we need to really hang on to truth and pass that truth on to our children so they can understand and have a worldview in our society. But also, it is the ultimate play. I think it's the AI and robotics replacing workers. Now, predictions for 2025 as we finish. I believe there's trends coming in the year that we need to pay attention to. Greater conflict between China and Taiwan. China's economy is in shambles right now. Xi is resorting back to some Mao's doctrine that the regions are responsible for any uprisings. So those leaders in those regions are going to be held responsible if there's any uprising, because they believe that as the economy is tanking in China, very bad. The real estate market, the bond market, all those things are absolutely in shambles. People are going to be desperate and protest. What can solve all of this? I believe their play is Taiwan, and ultimately grabbing a hold of the chip manufacturing, unifying the country. One of the most advanced chips are made there in the world. I think another trend is not only in Europe, in the UK, but also in the US, Australia. It's a censorship that is coming. And hopefully, the administration can slow it down. But there is a censorship, especially about climate change, especially about leaders. Talk about Starmer. Starmer doesn't want anybody to criticize him, wants to suspend elections, and he wants to go back into Europe. There's going to be increase in governments trying to tax, carbon tax. I think that's going on in Canada already, but also big push in Australia. The conflict in Israel with Islam is going to continue. I think Iran will have this, there will be this showdown with Israel. I'm not saying this year, this coming year, but I think also watch out for Afghanistan, Pakistan. They're heading for war too. And I think there's going to be a big push for what they call Greater Israel, the border with Syria, the border with Lebanon, what's going to happen with what they call the West Bank, which is Judea and Samaria. But I think in the church, there's going to be a greater refinement of the remnant and a separation from the false church of what is true from what is false to what is true. I think there needs to be a separation from the false church by the remnant, and it's going to continue. Also believe believers who are in these false churches will eventually leave and join the remnant. So keep praying, keep preaching. Don't stop reaching out to believers who are seeing the truth and will eventually come out of false churches who are continue to go woke, continue to go into the LGBT agenda and the world agenda. And of course, you're going to see that more a trend in the United States. So commit yourself this coming year to more gospel preaching in your life, more prayer, more reading of God's word, more fellowship, more witnessing, personal testimony, passing out tracts. Those are great ways to share the gospel. Get equipped. Take some courses at your local church if you have one, or online. Get equipped by understanding how to share the gospel. Get involved in evangelism and discipleship in some form. If you have a house church or house group, talk to your leaders there and say, hey, can we go witnessing together? Can we share the gospel together? Can we pass out some tracts together? Pray, read God's word, fellowship, and witness. And by the way, my prayer request for this year for us is, as a community church of Devore, our leaders in our congregation, that we would have more wisdom. We'd have more love. We would have more open doors set for us by the Lord to equip the body of Christ. We have plans to go into different parts of the mission field and Latin American community, Spanish community. So please pray for us on that in different parts of the world, to go to Australia, to go to the UK, to go to Europe, into India. Please pray for Moriel and the missions there, and more open doors for the leaders there, for David Lister, for Jacob Prash, for all that who are involved, Sandy, Jay, the ministry there, for Davey, and those who participate, for Andy in Israel, and pray for the ministries that have joined together with us, and that we will be able to be a unified body of Christ, preaching and teaching until Jesus comes. Thank you so much for being with us today. This is our last update of the year. Pray that we have some more this coming year. It's been an amazing year in one way, a difficult year in another way. welcoming what the Lord has for us next year, and remembering what the Lord did for us this past year. So God bless you guys. Please, if you have any questions, you can reach us at ccodtruth.org. You can get a hold of us, devoretruth@gmail.com. Find us on YouTube, Devore Truth. You could also find Moriel at moriel.org and in the Moriel channel, Moriel TV. So God bless you guys. Happy New Year. Keep preaching Jesus.